head of the most powerful crime family in the country, died of a heart attack. As the so-called boss of bosses of Manhattan, he attempted to steer the families away from drug trafficking, believing that narcotics convictions would invite unwanted infiltrations of the federal government. His death could result in war between the factions in the family.
I didn't have, at that time, I didn't have the aspirations to be anybody big in the family, because all I wanted to do was make a lot of money. My uncle, Nino, was probably my biggest role model. His one dream in life was to die in the street with a gun in his hand. You know, and if that's not being proud of being a gangster, you know, Nino's the kind of guy that could walk into a restaurant and everybody will look up and go, look at the gangster. You know, I mean, he did what we used to call wearing it, and he wore it 24 hours a day. You know, I mean, if you saw him in his bathrobe, he was wearing it. He'd have the dark glasses on, he'd have the bathrobe on, and it was him. He didn't change. He made me resign being the class president, because part of your duties were, when the teacher was out of the room, when there was assemblies and stuff, you had to write who the bad people were, who was talking out, and, you know, while the teacher was out of the room and stuff like that. And he said, well, what you're telling me is you're a stool pigeon, and we can't have a stool pigeon in our family. So go back and tell the teacher tomorrow you can't be the class president. I just had to resign. I felt like I was starting to learn about my family. I saw the gradual ascent or descent, however you want to look at it, of my uncle, because every time we'd go to Brooklyn, there'd be another new car and there'd be more new clothes, and we'd go once a week, and he'd always give me 100 at the door when I was leaving to go back out, you know, to go home. So I knew he was doing good, but I never really paid much attention to that life at that time. When I joined the Green Berets, I went over to my Uncle Nino's house, and it was in the evening, and I walked in all proud and, you know, figuring I was going to go save the world from communism. And I told him I had joined the Green Berets, and it was like a top, the elite, you know, fighting unit in the army. And he just sat down in a chair, and I'll never forget, he just looked at me and he goes, boy, you are an idiot. He says, I always thought you were an idiot, but you are an idiot. And I said, what? He says, you don't die for these politicians, and you don't die for generals. You die for us. You die for your family. I think the military prepared me more for going back to Brooklyn than Brooklyn prepared me for going into the military. But the family doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bloodline. You know, it's just the family. Everybody that's there is the family. When you take, you know, the oaths and when you get made, I mean, that comes ahead of your own blood family. It comes ahead of your kids. It comes ahead of your wife. You know, if your wife's dying in the kitchen and you need to perform a tracheotomy and they give you a call and say, come, she's got to find somebody else to do the tracheotomy because you got to go. I mean, that's the rules. You see, when you get into that life, it's not like somebody just takes you and says, okay, bam, here, go out and do this. It's a gradual, again, ascent or descent, no matter who, depending on your opinion of it. It's gradual, you know. First I ran a car service, then I made a couple of pickups, then I did a little of this, then I did a little of that, and it just escalates and escalates, and you take on more and more, and you start feeling in here more and more like that's what I do for a living now. That's what I do for my family. And this was like a rite of passage. This is when, and I've heard it so often, and you know, I've never heard it in real street vernacular, but in the books and in the movies, that was making your bones. I mean, it's not that easy to walk up and just shoot somebody in the head on the street. You know, it's a very difficult thing to do. And I mean, the first thing they had me do was rig a hand grenade in somebody's car, you know. And I happened to have gone to school with this kid, and it was for something that 12 years earlier, he had broken my uncle's nose in a fight. And my uncle waited 12 years, and all that time, He said, we're gonna get him, we're gonna get him, we're gonna get him. He didn't get killed. He got a broken leg or some stuff. About 8-9 months later, we saw him again, and I figured by this time maybe Nino had calmed down about it and got it out of his mind, because usually when you try and you miss, you figure, okay, we tried, we missed, leave the guy alone. Not so. It was my wife's birthday party, and he got me out of the we were all at the birthday party. Roy came over, the mail, and he said, guess who's on the corner on 85th Street? I said, who? I said, Vinny Mook. So I had to tell my wife, okay, we're leaving the birthday party, and we all got disguises on. And we went and this time just shot him in the street. And went over to Brooklyn Bridge and gave all our clothes away, the disguise clothes away to the bums, and went back to the party like nothing happened. After Carlo died, there was two factions of the family. There was the Brooklyn faction, which was basically headed by Paul Castellano. And there was the Manhattan faction, which was headed by Aniello Della Croce. One of those two were going to be boss of the family. It was a very tense time, because that is always when it's very ripe for war within the families. Nino spoke to me in the afternoon. He said, we're going to make Paulie tonight. So I went to Gemini, and I picked up a package which turned out to be an M2 carbine. Went home and assembled it, and Nino said that the Manhattan faction would be coming to the house about 7:30, and that I was to go upstairs in my living room window, which overlooked the entranceway to his apartment downstairs and the driveway. And he said, there's supposed to be no guns at the meeting. He says, but I'm taping a pistol under the table. He says, if anything goes wrong and you hear any shooting downstairs, he says, just kill everybody that comes out of the house. And about 7 o'clock, Paul and Tommy Bellotti came with Joe Gallo. He was the consigliere to the family. And about 7:15, the Manhattan faction came, and they walked in, and I clicked the safety off. And probably within 15-20 minutes, the Manhattan faction left. I put the safety back on. And then Paulie and Tommy and Joe Gallo left. And about a minute after that, Nino knocked on my door, and I went downstairs, and he said, Paulie's the new boss.